Postmortem continues in the wake of the 16-point blowout on Tuesday in Jackson County. We are happy to say hello in studio to our friend Tony Botello of Tony'sKansasCity.com. What's up, brother? How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Pete? Thanks for having me on.
Doing well, man. Great to have you here. So you were just telling me a story off the air. I want you to share it as we start our conversation here on when you realized on voting day that this thing was about to go down in flames.
It was a realization too late.
Realization too late.
Yeah. I won't say exactly where, but my tia Teresa, my Aunt Teresa lives in South Kansas City. And I take her to vote. I'm not a saint. She gave me some money. So I take her to go vote. And I'm there. And everybody, it's a South Kansas City neighborhood. She's the only Latina there. She speaks English perfectly, though. So This is basically just a transport issue. Yeah. So I'm taking her there, and everybody at this place, I mean, there's not anybody under 85.
Wow.
Yeah, my tia Teresa is pulling off the J-Lo. She's 81.
Yeah.
So she's the newcomer there. Yeah. She is the hot young Latina.
Yeah. At a ripe 81.
Yeah, of her voting community. I take her in to go vote. She does her thing. She gets her ballot. And there is this lady there, and she is just screaming to everybody. Somebody asked her. She wasn't an electioneering, but somebody asked her. She said, "I'm not voting for this thing because it's going to ruin downtown." 89 maybe. And I'm thinking to myself, when was the last time she went downtown? Is she worried about hopping on the streetcar to go get a coffee? No. And so that was the sense. It was way too late for my coverage, but that was when I realized that kind of angst and really deep-seated opposition. No, they don't have a plan. They're going to mess things up. And she was 85, and that was really driven home to her. And she's not on Facebook. She's not checking her phone for tweets. Nobody's sliding her in her DMs.
Yeah.
And so this is the sentiment that she came with, and that kind of just up close and personal thing. That to me tells the story of the election.
So what else do you look back on Tuesday night and think to yourself? You admit maybe you were a little late to it and what ended up happening, but what else do you attribute it to?
Well, and obvious thing, I think your audience might appreciate this because it's. Well, two things, but I'll go to the second one later. Demographics is destiny, and I think the kind of the demographics, you pointed out the proletarian thing, but I don't want to go at as so much as, just the overall campaign. This morning on the blog, I blame Sherman, but then when you go into the campaign, and he's a brilliant consultant, but in the end, does it make sense to have a GOP, a mastermind, a juggernaut in the GOP world, run a campaign inside heavily Democratic Jackson County?
Talking Jeff Rowe and Axiom.
Right.
Well, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, is he a wizard? All I've done is see him lose around here, to be honest.
He does behind the scenes stuff, and I know that I know Jeff a little bit. We've met, we've talked a couple times, and he's very aggressive. And this leads into the other thing. This was a big thing for Casey Tenants. Oh, we beat the billionaires. So easy to beat billionaires. So easy. They have so much to lose.
Yeah.
They have so much. That's the one. Look up at your flag and salute it. This is the one place in the world where you can smack around a billionaire in public and nothing's going to happen to you because we live in a litigious society of laws. This is great. It's count yourself as a lucky American because every day you could say something nasty about billionaires. I never liked Teslas. I think they're ugly.
Yeah.
They're dumb. And I can say that, and I don't have, if I lived in Mexico, somebody would knock on my door and be like, "Hey, we heard what you said.
Yeah,
you're going to die now."
Yeah,
but yeah, so this is a great country. Not really that hard of a deal to beat billionaires, and I just know these people who have so much to lose. Jeff Rowe was fighting this thing with his hands tied. Normally, what Axiom does in Kansas City is stuff like the zoo tax, stuff where it's just everybody, he's putting out mailers, very generic campaigns. This was a very complex campaign, and my guess is, I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is that he was fighting it with one hand tied behind his back and his feet laced together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, you know him, I don't know him. I've known plenty of his clients, but, I see him get blown out with Amanda Atkins 2 straight cycles. I see him, blow out Ron DeSantis. He had all that money, and who's done less with more than that Ron DeSantis campaign? And now I see this, and I'm like, I don't really get it. I'm not gonna lie, I don't get it, Tony. I just pointed out,
Right, and I think as we go back, And here's another thing, and I don't know how much credence this is, and this is just, speaking to the angst, just to let people always complain about misinformation, but here are the 2 points that I really just thought that people were completely mistaken about. There is no saving the K. It's gone. On Throwback Thursday, it's not going to be a thing anymore. That's sad, and it's a waste, and it's horrible. It's not going to be a thing anymore. And from what I've heard, a little bit of inside gossip, the Royals aren't talking to the exec anymore. There's no. Everyone has this thing of like, oh, how do we go back to the we're not going back to the drawing board with that guy.
Yeah. I can't blame him for that. Tony Botello, Tony's Kansas City, is on KCMO. Listen, Frank White is looking at this thing like it's a huge win for him, but it's not, because how many people voted no because they're pissed off about how he handled and the county handled the assessment issue, right?
A lot of my readers want to say this is a taxpayer victory. And they're right, and they deserve credit for that. People are frustrated with taxes, but you're right. I don't see how this is a victory for him, king of property taxes.
Yeah.
And if you really want to get into the weeds with it, without that revenue coming in, you're not looking at getting a discount on your property taxes.
Without the team revenue
That's
you're
right.
talking about. Yeah, no, there's an element to that too. There's no doubt about it. So when you look back on the teams, the Hunts, the John Sherman, how this all played out, what do you think this means for them, and whether it's just a bruised ego or if there's something more at play here?
The Royals are out of Jackson County. As long as the current executive team, they are not negotiating with them anymore. They're not talking to them. They will talk to some of the legislators, not all of them. They don't have a lot of points of contact, and that's how I know what I know. There's maybe 2 people that they're dealing with on the legislature, really just one that has their ear, and they are not talking to anybody else. They've cut back things. So going forward, if we don't see some change in leadership, little hint for Nick's segment, but if we don't see some change in leadership, then we're not having any more discussions about the Royals. And I don't think that was driven home to. That's a tough sell. People don't like threats, but that was the reality of it.
I wrote about this morning and I talked about it on the show, but we know this county is going to lean heavily Democratic, but just can we get some more mainstream, serious people on things like the Jackson County legislature? You end up with these races where it's guys like Manny Abarca against Justice Horny. These are terrible options. Mark, what are you laughing at in there? I don't understand what you're laughing at.
The best nickname ever.
Oh, the best nickname ever, he says. I thought that was his name. You're telling me that's not his name? No? Okay, all right. Well, anyway, I thought it was his name. So those are the options. You can't think of 2 worse options. The money people have to realize who these legislators are matter, and if they don't, they're going to hurt themselves because they got to deal with these people on a regular basis for their projects and things like that.
Again, I love smacking around billionaires. It's my favorite occupation, even though I kind of was neutral on this. I go back to John Sherman, and I think you're right. With him being a relatively new face for people who have been around here for a while, relatively new face on the civic scene, and I think that kind of investment in getting mainstream elected officials and kind of participating, it comes with his kind of approach, which we've talked about before, was really just a bungled approach, and like, hey, I'm going to come in here and I've got this mustache, so I like it. I think he looks fine. I don't like talking about people's looks. I think he looks fine, but you will not on the blog. So many people against that mustache. I think it's
if only we could all look as good as Tony. That's this guy's a stud every time he walks in here. I shrink 6 inches.
I have played. This is a family-friendly show. I have places I want to go with that.
Okay.
Okay. So, but yeah, he is. I really attribute this to him, and maybe, and not so because the Chiefs have this covered. They have very deep connections. They go back such a long time in the city, and they run things more effectively. Even for the next generation, Gracie is every teen girl's idol. She's like the B-list Taylor Swift. She's more approachable. You might see Gracie at a mall somewhere.
Yeah.
And so the Chiefs have it covered. John Sherman is a new owner, and his ownership team, it was very much like your boss bringing you in and telling you, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I think that speaks to what you're saying all the way around, with elected officials, with his participation in the community, and the coalition that they failed to build.
All right, let's get right to it. Frank White is the county executive. He got reelected in 22. We know the teams are beyond pissed at him. What are you hearing?
Throwback Thursday. This is the way things used to be done. The teams under previous ownership used to go through their list of like, okay, who's on our side? Here's what we need. This is who we are on our side. This is who isn't. And then they used to get rid of, put money against all the civic involvement that we were talking about. This time around, you used to think with petitions that like, it's grandma or your aunt on the street corner, like, oh, I want to be involved in our democracy. No. I know people who go from town to town collecting petitions. They have expressed an interest in the current Frank White petition to recall, which is ongoing. They have a Facebook group of about 2,000 people, very active, maybe one of the forces that turned the tide in this election. And they may find in the next, this is bloggy stuff, caveat, here's my grain of salt. They may find they might get some additional funding to their efforts in the very near future.
Ooh. So the teams could suddenly be funding the Recall Frank White effort.
The teams or many interests who had a stake in the yes vote might find that one of the and that's something that we didn't see non-TBT. We've never seen in any of these stadium tax renewals. We've never seen an elected official just throw hand grenades into the whole thing. And he's claiming it's a victory. He did win. And this is really part of his legacy. It's the ball player who was spurned, who was like, hey, screw you teams. And he really made his mark on Kansas City history with this win, like it or not.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. Okay, so we'll have to wait and see if the Recall Frank White effort gets a little extra juice here in the weeks ahead, huh?
That's what I think that people should be looking for, that it's not on anybody else's radar.
Okay, that's very interesting because you're right. If the teams don't want to work with him anymore, I would have told him get involved back in 22 when he was running against Teresa Galvin. And yes, she was a Republican, but she was, a very moderate candidate. And she would have done a hell of a lot better job than he's done, though. There's no doubt about that in my book. But they don't care about these local elections. It ties back to what I was talking about earlier,
Yeah.
So Tony's Kansas City is here. All right, take me through KC Tenants. What is their legacy after this on Tuesday?
It is a paradigm shift. With an election this big, turnout minimum 24%, some places 35%. Normally how elections work are, you get your unions, and especially in Jackson County, Democratic dominated. You get your unions, AFL-CIO, SEIU, the heavy constructors. These people pay money, and you have they mobilize voters. And it used to be by door knocks. It used to be by like old school union halls or union roster lists, and they would go take people in buses and cars and do that. This current election, what we've seen is, and people have said this before a little bit, but maybe a little bit more of social media mobilization. And I think in local elections, we haven't seen that. And so I think mobilizing people, just trolling people, and you saw the other side pick it up. The troll bots came back. And that's what's disappointing to me is a lot of people like you and I who watch these conversations is you can see them as like, oh, that's a bot.
Yeah.
And so you had bots fighting bots on your horrible Facebook feed.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. All right. My big fear was that the local media would say and give tenants all the credit for this no win. And that's not fair. There were many factions of no voters, not just them. And the reality is, too, the no vote was about the same outside of city limits as it was inside. It was about 58-42 across the board. So I don't think this is like a great win for the socialist cause in Kansas City, but I also don't think conservatives could look at this and say, we've got a conservative anti-tax revolt coming to Jackson County. I don't think either of those things are true. What about you?
And no, that's 100% true. I guess I go back to, I think that's our main takeaway from this conversation. It's the inability to build a coalition. Yeah. And I think now moving forward, though, what you've seen, talking about KC Tenants, is that they can deliver votes on a and that was always in doubt. The New York Times hyped them in the previous election where they backed two incumbents, and it was 9% turnout. I didn't have any reason to take them seriously. Now I think we do.
Where is their funding? Does anyone know?
Dark money. It's all dark money. Nobody knows. They could have poured in $2 billion gazillion into Facebook to turn your grandma crazy. And, your grandma is wearing Che Guevara T-shirts now and hopping down to the streetcar to get a latte to go to the next protest. So we have no idea. And so I think there's a lot of power of the people. We beat billionaires, whatever. When we unite, it's dark money.
Yeah. And if Soros is funding them, I don't want to hear about that crap. That's
Right.
the irony of what they do. The billionaires funding these losers to fight the billionaires, even though I think they had some good points on this vote no stuff. All right, take me through then the Kansas side. You had some reporting on this yesterday. There are meetings that have already taken place with the Chiefs.
I heard it was next day, and I heard this from a few sources. Fox 4 followed up on it. Most people don't want to give me my credit, so thank you, Pete, for having me on.
Of course.
And Senator David Haley was like, yeah, probably. Like, we know how that work. I think, again, this isn't bots. These are people I know on social media, we're going to find out for the Missouri side and the Kansas City side, especially on Kansas City, Missouri. We like to Gov Kelly is the kind of the progressive or progressive linchpin out there in Topeka. That feeling may change when we see very, very clear-cut moves to lure the Chiefs and maybe lure the Royals. And a lot of this is speculation, but there is a world, and it'd work out great for me. I want the Royals to stay in the Metro, even though I think Nashville could be on the table. But I'd like it if they stayed in the Metro. But there is a very real possibility that Kansas has the money, and with the Star bonds, the Star wrote about this as well, with Star bonds, they don't have to go through this kind of ugly slap fight vote that we did. They can get it through their House and Senate and have Gov Kelly sign it, and it could happen. It could take place within a session. So my reporting was that we're already hearing meetings are taking place and took place on day after.
So yesterday.
Yep.
Wow.
In downtown KCK, it's really Mark Donovan is about. Well, you're like 6'2". He's like 6'5".
Is he that big?
He's hard to miss. So when I have people from the dot texting me like, "Hey, do you know why a 6'5" white guy is down here having lunch, on Central Avenue?" Yeah, it's pretty easy to pick out.
Who is he meeting with?
My source says chamber guys. There's also some of the officials. I don't want to call anybody out, but some of the state house officials, and I don't know what they talked about, but there was a meeting down there, and it could be another 6-foot white guy in big black cars.
Yeah, well, maybe he just wanted to, get some authentic Latina food or something like that.
It is the dot. So
It's possible. All right. Speaking of your heritage, Mark, I just put the clip from Good Morning America in the 917 block. Can you pull that here and scroll to that minute clip where we got mentioned on Good Morning America? Did you hear this clip by the chance?
I did not.
Okay. All right. We'll turn off Tony's mic. That way he can hear it on the overhead speaker. Mark will tell you when it's set up. We had Mark Donovan on the show on Monday, talk about the tax. But I had to ask him about Rashee Rice, right? So that thing got picked up by TMZ and Good Morning America and some others. So I want to play for you how the reporter mentioned the name. Here, let's turn off his mic there, and then we'll play the clip.
Overnight Chiefs President Mark Donovan addressing the incident on KCMO Talk Radio with Pete Mundo.
In all these situations.
What do you think of that, Tony? Authentic, huh?
There's always room for another salsa station in Kansas City. so I know things are going really well. You're on FM now, but there's always that other audience.
I guess always branding and reaching out, my man. It's great to have you here, Tony. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Pete.
All right, that's Tony Botello, Tony'sKansasCity.com. Check it out for all the real news happening in this town, since so many in town don't want to do it. And as he noted, a lot of people in town are taking his news, using it, and not giving him proper credit, which we always do on KCMO 95.7 FM.